From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome on in, Giants fans, to episode 163 of the Talk is Cheap podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Matt Lombardo, but big changes to the podcast this week as we welcome in Darryl Slater, covering the Giants for us at NJ Advanced Media. Darryl, thanks for dropping by, man.
Good to be here, man. Yeah, so I'll be Ryan. Obviously, has gone to less green pastures, we shall say. So,
We'd like to think so.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll be with you the rest of the year here covering the Giants, and then we'll see. But yeah, so I've been around here covering the Giants for most of the year so far. Yeah. A little bit of Jets, mostly Giants. So gotten a little familiar with the team and working with you and stuff like that. So. Yeah,
you're going to jump right in, and I got to give you a helmet sticker before we even get into this, because prior to jumping over and covering the Giants full-time along with myself, you did a terrific job and still do a terrific job covering the entire NFL. Some high impactful stories with you going down to Washington and talking to Landon Collins and Eric Flowers and all of those ex-Giants. You were covering the Antonio Brown fiasco like nobody else in the league, so kudos to you for that, and I'm really looking forward to working with you for the rest of this year.
Yeah, man, thanks. I appreciate that. It should be fun, and big game, obviously, this week for the Giants.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So before we dive into a couple of housekeeping items that we like to get to every week, be sure to follow Darryl on Twitter. He's at Darryl Slater. Of course, I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL. And if you like what you hear on the show, we'd love if you would subscribe in the Apple Podcast Store. You can check us out on YouTube, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, you can follow the show at Talk is Cheap NYG, and certainly a big game for the Giants, probably a bigger game than it would be for most 2-5 teams, Darryl, heading to Detroit to take on the Lions. Pat Shurmur from the Michigan area, from the greater Detroit metro area, a little bit of a homecoming for him, and certainly a lot more pressure on Shurmur and the Giants this year heading into this game than there was last year during the preseason, and not just because it's a regular season game, but kind of how things have played out over the first year and a half of Shurmur's tenure with the Giants.
The results just haven't been there, and I think it is going to come down here to a matter of how patient is John Mara going to be with a team that is young, yes, with a team that has a rookie quarterback, yes, but what if they keep losing? And that becomes the big question here, because Pat Shurmur is 7-16 so far with the Giants. He's the second losingest coach in team history based on winning percentage in terms of guys who have coached a qualified amount of games, 20 games. And so, look, the results haven't been there the last 3 weeks, and there was a lot of optimism coming out of what Daniel Jones was able to do against Tampa, what he was able to do against Washington, but obviously the last 3 weeks the results haven't been there, and you could kind of understand and excuse them losing to the Vikings, losing to the Patriots, but last week was obviously a disaster on so many levels for this team to lose to the Cardinals, and this is a winnable road game for them to go up there and win this game, so it's a big stretch. I think we said it all along, the Cardinals, Lions, Cowboys, Jets pre-bye week stretch was a really
defining moment for this team, almost.
Accurate litmus test for Jones and Shurmur.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that, and I think that what has a lot of people really disappointed and probably opened some eyes in that building is the fact that they didn't just lose to the Cardinals, Darryl, who were 30th in DVOA going into the game. They were embarrassed offensively. Daniel Jones sacked 8 times, an offensive line that was climbing the ranks in PFF. I believe they were 10th or 11th in the league heading into last Sunday. They allowed 22 pressures, and there's been a lot of talk about Daniel Jones holding on to the football too long, and I think there's something to be said for that and how he contributed to at least some of, if not a majority of those 8 sacks. They only scored 14 offensive points, and yes, it was a miserable rainy day, but it's hard to make that many excuses when a defense hadn't been performing at that high of a level going into this game, and all of a sudden it almost feels like when you look at the winning percentage or lack thereof for Pat Shurmur, you look at the kind of the disappointment of last year and the little bit of a regression that we've seen from Daniel Jones over the last 3 weeks after 2 really fast starts to games against Tampa Bay and Washington in his first 2 career starts. You almost have to wonder how hot the seat or warm the seat is getting under Pat Shurmur, and it's not as if a rookie quarterback is a guarantee that he's going to be able to bail him out.
If you look at people look at that and say, oh, well, you got a rookie quarterback, the team would be understanding of that. And he would keep his job. That's not really at all how it has worked recently in the NFL. You look at coaches who have gotten canned with a rookie quarterback. Todd Bowles, obviously, last year. Hugh Jackson last year. Jeff Fisher a few years ago.
Steve Wilkes and Josh Rosen.
In his first year. So ultimately, the Giants hired Pat Shurmur to be the guy to mold Eli Manning's replacement. So that is what he should be judged on, along with winning games. So if they don't see, the Giants don't see, John Mara doesn't see progress here down the stretch from Daniel Jones and doesn't see things moving in the right direction, you have to wonder if he's going to pull the plug here after just 2 years. And Pat Shurmur got a 5-year contract, so obviously that's a tough bullet to take with 3 years of the buyout. So I think this stretch is obviously enormous before the bye week, and it'll be interesting to see how Daniel Jones develops, continues to progress. One thing Pat Shurmur was talking about today, kind of building off what you were saying about holding the ball too long, is some of those things from the those sacks that were on him, quote unquote, from that Cardinals game were a matter of him not going through his progressions and his reads quickly enough and not seeing the check down, focusing too much and too long on the downfield option and hoping that popped open and not just checking the ball down, because the Cardinals are trying to take away a lot of that stuff down the field. So that's something he needs to do a better job of going forward. It's a matter for a rookie quarterback not making mistakes, right? I mean, these guys are going to make mistakes, but
definitely going to be growing pains.
Don't repeat them, though.
Yep. Yeah, don't make the same mistake twice. And there's something to be said that it's kind of the antithesis of Eli Manning, because the biggest complaint about Eli Manning the last couple of years from Giants fans and from reporters was check down Charlie. Too quick to get to Saquon Barkley in the flat, or check it down in the slot to Evan Ingram and not looking downfield. So it's about finding that fine balance between taking the downfield shots when they're there, but when they're not getting through your progressions quick enough so that you're not, giving a defensive line or a front seven that extra second or two to get into the pocket, because in the NFL, they're going to make you pay for that. The speed of the game is just too quick where you can't sit in the pocket and wait for guys to break open. And part of that, and you brought this up to Pat Shurmur on Thursday, was do the wide receivers have to do a better job of getting open and getting separation? And I think part of that comes into the play, Darryl, that, Darius Slayton's a 5th-round pick. He played 69 of 71 snaps, so you're relying on a 5th-round rookie to play a meaningful part of your offense. He was only targeted twice. Sterling Shepard has been in the concussion protocol for the last 2 or 3 games. Golden Tate is just getting back and playing at a relatively high level. But this offense hasn't had the opportunity to get all 4 of those big weapons on the field together. And I think that's where, when we start talking big picture about how do you judge Pat Shurmur, how do you judge the development of Daniel Jones, well, it might be easy to spot what looks like a regression against 2 of the better defenses in the league. I think it's tough to really make a determination about what this duo is and what this quarterback is right now when they're not even taking the field with the offense as it was designed.
Yeah, and Sterling Shepard not going to play this week, most likely in Detroit, and that will mean through 8 games, Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate have been on the field together for just one of those games. So obviously Golden Tate's 4-game suspension for PDs is a big reason for that. So, but you had the stat earlier. We were standing on a practice and talking about it, and in terms of the number of games that the Giants have had their big 4 on the field together, you're talking about Saquon Barkley, Evan Ingram, Golden Tate, and Sterling Shepard, 0 games this year. So they're obviously 2-5 without those guys. Yep. And then last year, I think you said they were 2-7, right?
Yeah, so they're 4-12 in 2 years.
With, of course, Odell Beckham subbing out for Golden Tate there in that big 4. So obviously you need to have those guys out there, and the Giants this week will have 3 of the 4, presuming Sterling Shepard doesn't play. And look, it is a mitigating factor, but the bottom line is these guys and these coaches are judged on results, and having a rookie quarterback does not guarantee that you're back. So Pat Shurmur, one way or the other, he's going to have to prove he's the offensive guru they think he is, and find a way to scheme around the fact that you've had injuries, and that's just part of the reality in the NFL. And one way or the other, however you slice it, he has to get some progress from Daniel Jones this year. Otherwise, he's in trouble. Yeah,
John Mara came out and said it before the season that, this season will be judged a success or a failure if they walk out of MetLife Stadium in Week 17 and feel like they're headed in the right direction. And right now, Darryl, if you twisted my arm, I'd feel like this season, after so much promise when we left Raymond James Stadium and you saw the 4th quarter comeback drive and you saw Daniel Jones turn Evan Ingram into a one-play scoring drive type of player with that 75-yard touchdown pass, catch, and run, it feels like like all of that progress that you thought was being made is starting to slip away a little bit, and you're starting to slide back into the feeling of what you had in 2018 when you finished 5-11, and dare I say back to 2017 where the locker room fell apart. And we talked about this a little bit, and I wrote about it after the game, that in addition to developing Daniel Jones, Pat Shurmur has to keep this locker room together, because as the losses continue to mount, these guys, I mean, Janoris Jenkins is a guy that was suspended for conduct detrimental the last time this happened in 2017. There's finger pointing in the fabric of that quote-unquote culture that they tried to build over the offseason starts to come apart, that then becomes another factor that gets thrown into the decision-making of what you do with the head coach going into 2020.
No doubt. Yeah, that will get you unemployed very quickly in the NFL, as Ben McAdoo learned, in terms of having your locker room fall apart. We haven't seen any signs of that yet, but the reality is the Giants should be 1-6. I mean, they should have lost that game in Tampa.
Yeah.
And even though Daniel Jones did show progress and played really well, I think even if they lose that game with the defense collapsing late, you come out of that game kind of feeling good about Daniel Jones because of how he played. But then, like you said, he ran into the buzzsaw of the Vikings defense and the buzzsaw of the Patriots defense, and those type of games are really hard to judge a rebuilding young team with a rookie quarterback, because those teams are so vastly superior. But these litmus test games, these truer test games, Cardinals at home, I mean, that is a brutal loss. Lions on the road. Look, the Lions are better. They're improved. This is still a winnable game for the Giants, considering what the Lions looked like last year, and they're still not a team that's able to get over the hump against good teams, as you saw the past 3 weeks with their 3 straight losses. So I think, and then the Cowboys have looked beatable at
That's
times.
like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of
No
team,
doubt.
because
Yeah.
they come up to MetLife, and you covered the game against the Jets, and Sam Darnold, torched them, made that secondary look like Swiss cheese. And granted that game still came down to, very similarly to Giants-Buccaneers, to an onside kick that determined the outcome in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the Jets almost collapsed.
And then they return home to AT&T Stadium, and they just boat race the Eagles, and they look like the NFC East now is a one-team race with the Cowboys. So you don't really know what you're getting with Dallas from 1 week to the next. So if the Giants can somehow, get a win on the road against, as you talked about, a very beatable Detroit Lions team, and then come back home and beat the Cowboys, I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, you can start to feel really good about the direction of this team. But the flip side of that coin is, this is a Lions defense that has only had 10 quarterback sacks all year.
Wow.
So the Giants offensive line gives up 8 last week. This is the type of game where if the dam starts leaking again, you have to be really concerned about what the Giants offensive line is and what the offense is going to do against some much superior competition, because you still have one game against the Cowboys. You still have a game against Khalil Mack and the Bears, 2 games against that Eagles front seven that took its lumps against the Cowboys, but a lot of talent there with Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. So again, if you want to talk about litmus tests, we're going to find out where this Lions defense is and where the Giants offensive line is, coming off one of the worst performances in recent memory.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, they have to be able to stop this front. If they're going to stop any front, it should be this Detroit Lions front. And I think you look at this team, the Giants 2-5 right now, right? Would you be? I don't think anybody would be shocked if they went into their bye week at 5-5 or 2-8. It could totally go either way because of how, because of the opponents mainly, and because of how sort of uneven the Giants have looked. These are 3 games the Giants they could win these games, all 3 of them, but they could just as easily lose them. And I think the Jet game would be just a disaster.
That'd be an abject disaster,
especially if that moves them to 2-8. That would be a disaster.
And that's at the point that if you're 2-8. And if Jones regresses further from where he walked off the field against the Cardinals, I don't mean to go out too far on a limb or jump off a bridge too prematurely here, but if you're 2-8 going into the bye week, I think there's some long and hard conversations about the head coach. Look, Washington pulled the plug on Jay Gruden midseason. I don't think the Giants are the type of organization that would do that, but if it's ugly against the Lions and against the Cowboys and you lose to the Jets in embarrassing fashion, I think that speeds up some conversations that might have been saved for the offseason.
Well, yeah, they did it with McAdoo later in the season, obviously, and there were some other mitigating factors, of course, as we mentioned, with how disastrous the locker room was. But, yeah, I think ultimately, when push comes to shove, I think Pat Shurmur will be able to do enough to come back next year. They will look at the development of Jones, and they'll also look at the fact that he is a sort of a raw player, not a guy who you pegged as like an Andrew Luck type who could come in and play and thrive immediately. And so I think he will do enough to return next year, but it's certainly not a lock.
Yeah.
Certainly not a lock at 2-5, and these next 3 games will be enormous going into the bye in terms of the perception of where the Giants are headed. And remember that is big because the Giants, their ownership and John Mara, they don't want to be perceived as failures. And the reality is the perception of Pat Shurmur right now as a head coach is that he is not a good head coach. And people forget that, how bad those Browns teams were that he coached. But the wins and losses have not been there for him. He is the 10th losingest coach in NFL history in terms of winning percentage among guys who have coached at least 50 games. He loses Sunday. His career winning percentage drops below 300.
Wow.
He's tied for seventh worst coach ever in the NFL among guys who have coached at least 50 games. Now, granted, the rosters have a lot to do with that, but there's a perception here, and there will continue to be a perception if he continues to struggle, that he's a failing head coach. And the Giants do not like the perception of them being a failing organization. Not that anyone does, but this is a very image-conscious organization, and so I think that will play into it. So, enormous game for Pat Shurmur on so many levels this week as he gets ready to go home to Michigan.
Yeah, you and I have both covered the league for a long time. You covered the Jets, I covered the Eagles, and now on the Giants beat. I'm going to put this to you in the scale of, let's say, like a hot sauce. If you go from, Buffalo mild to Frank's red hot suicide caliber nuclear wings, how warm is the seat under Pat Shurmur going into this game?
What's sriracha? I like sriracha.
Sriracha, that's pretty good. There's some heat to it, but it's not going to make you, start crying.
Maybe that. I guess it's all a personal palate thing. I like hot sauce. I like sriracha. So, look, I think probably if you're doing it on 1 to 10, 6, maybe.
Yeah, that's about right. Like a 5.5, 6 type of.
Yeah.
Because they can still string together some wins, and you can still get enough out of Daniel Jones to make you feel good about bringing Pat Shurmur back, and that's a big picture conversation to have. I'm with you. I think around the 5.5, 6 is probably where the seat is for Pat Shurmur. But I think that the more that these losses mount in winnable football games, such as last Sunday, the hotter it's going to get. And the Lions game obviously is a little bit different and presents a different scenario as well, because while there's no certainty that Pat Shurmur comes back at the end of next year, there's no certainty that at least a handful of players are back here next week, because you have the trade deadline at 4 p.m. Tuesday, and the Giants cupboard isn't exactly overflowing with talent, but it's not bare either when it comes to tradable assets. Guys like Alec Ogletree, guys like Nate Solder, who's come up in conversation of potential trade talks, Janoris Jenkins, the last man standing from that secondary that wasn't traded last year or walked away via free agency, Rhett Ellison, a strong blocking tight end, maybe Golden Tate or even Evan Ingram could be on the block and could be moved if the Giants, and they probably should deem themselves as sellers, can get the type of assets they want in return to continue building around Jones looking to the future. There's no guarantee that all of those guys are back when the Giants come back to the building next Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL trade deadline, it seems, for a few years there was very quiet, not in the way of the baseball trade deadline, which typically was, a lot more going on. But it seems like in recent years, the teams have become a lot more willing to pull the trigger on these trades, and especially doing it before the deadline. You've seen the guys who have been moved already: Jalen Ramsey, Marcus Peters,
Mohamed Sanu, Emmanuel Sanders.
High-profile trades already, and we're not even, we're less than, those are more than a week outside of the deadline. So I think that Jenkins is an interesting one, but the issue there in terms of mitigating what the Giants would potentially get for him is that he has a bloated salary next year. So you're looking at a situation where it's a non-guaranteed salary, but you're looking at a situation where a team's going to say, look, we'll take the guy. He's going to be a half-year rental because we're cutting him in the offseason. We're not going to take on that salary next year. If the salary was manageable, the team could look at him as like a 1.5-year asset and say, all right, we're going to give you maybe a little more. So the Giants, what they're likely to get for Janoris Jenkins is probably mitigated by that. And I think Evan Ingram would be a terrible decision to trade him. I think he is a rising player. I really like him. I agree. I think he's a guy who could be a leader for this team. I think that would be a bad one. And look, the issue here too is you want to get something out of Daniel Jones in his rookie year. So do you want to start giving away guys who could really help him? Whether that's Tate, whether that's Evan Ingram. I think that certainly Alec Ogletree, certainly Janoris Jenkins on the other side of the ball. are possibilities.
Yeah, I think that last year you look kind of as a barometer, and the Giants made a couple of trades. They traded Snacks, Damon Harrison to the Lions, who they'll see this week for a 5th-round pick. They traded Eli Apple for, I believe, a conditional 7th-round pick. They kind of sold off some assets on defense, and it's all about looking at how do you develop Daniel Jones this year and still have pieces to build around him next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if by next Tuesday it's the potential trade targets on defense who wind up getting moved. 2 in particular, Darryl. One, Janoris Jenkins, I think there's a high likelihood he gets moved because you have a lot of teams around the league, including the Kansas City Chiefs, who are competitive teams looking to make a playoff push but need a cornerback. And the Giants, you have to look at their situation as well. It kind of coincides with Sam Beal being eligible to return from IR. His first game that he's able to be back is next week against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 9. So you can kind of swap out Jenkins, get a young player on the field, and get an asset for Jenkins. And I'm my spidey sense kind of started tingling when they went out and they brought in Deion Buchanan this week after not picking him up the last couple games when he was available, because I think Alec Ogletree is a guy at that contract and an inside linebacker, a guy who's healthy, another position on defense where if a team needs linebacker help, the Giants could get by trading Alec Ogletree, getting out from underneath some of that salary, playing Buchanan the rest of the way, and adding another draft pick to their war chest. So if you twisted my arm and asked me who were the 2 most likely players to be dealt, it would be Jenkins and Ogletree.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Jenkins and you look at the ramifications of that cap-wise, I was going back and forth with somebody on Twitter about this, but it really is the same as if he was cut. If they're going to cut him after this season, which they're probably going to do anyway, why not just move him now? The season is, you're going to be 8 games into the season. You're probably not going anywhere in terms of being a win-now team and making the playoffs. Not at this point. Not at 3-5, and certainly not at 2-6. So if you're going to cut the guy anyway, why not move him and get something for him?
Get something back for him. Yeah. And they made the corresponding roster move, so to speak, by bringing in Deion Buchanan, who has experience in that money backer role, can play inside linebacker, can play safety. So they kind of have bought themselves some insurance against moving him, and same with Beal coming off IR to replace Janoris Jenkins. On offense, I think it's interesting that Nate Solder, that the Giants reportedly, according to Jason La Canfora, have been receiving calls from a team like the Browns. They're shopping. They want Trent Williams out of Washington. If he doesn't go, there's been reports that they've called the Eagles about Halapoulivaati Vaitai. Reports they've called the Giants about Nate Solder. I'm kind of in the middle on trading Nate Solder because at his best, he's a competent, left tackle that you want protecting Daniel Jones's blind side. But the games where he's been competent and not have been kind of few and far between, because he allowed 5 sacks on the season, allowed the 2 sacks on Sunday against the Cardinals. I believe he's allowed 26 pressures so far this season. Where do you stand on potentially trading Nate Solder? Because my thought is, if you can get even a 4th or a 5th round pick, you can bring up, Chad Slade, or you can go to the Seattle Seahawks practice squad and sign Chad Wheeler, a guy who's been here, and plug him in for the second half of the season, knows the system. But again, you get salary cap relief, but what's the cost in terms of Jones's development if you would move on?
Yeah, you don't want to put him in a dangerous situation where you feel like you have a player out there who you're just developing as your left tackle on the fly, and you got this guy on the blind side of your prized rookie quarterback. So I think if they feel like that Slade or Wheeler would potentially be a competent enough replacement, and it's hard for us to say because we really haven't seen as much of these guys as the coaching staff has in terms of working with them internally. If they feel that he can be a plug and play competent, maybe a slightly less effective player, but still a guy who's not going to get your quarterback killed, then sure. But if not, then there's no reason to experiment on the fly at that position when you have a player back there who's so important to your franchise.
Yep, no, I don't disagree with any of that, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the Giants do. They were very active last year. You saw the headline of the tabloids with Dave Gettleman with the everything must go sign. They didn't trade everybody. They brought Jenkins back. He was kind of the last of the Mohegans, and here we are again with Janoris Jenkins' name and Alec Ogletree and Rhett Ellison and Golden Tate, which is interesting. And I think that the Tate move became a little bit less likely when the 49ers traded for Emmanuel Sanders, because I thought San Francisco trying to load up on weapons around Jimmy Garoppolo, and you look at even the Patriots trading for Mohamed Sanu, those are two competitive teams that needed receivers who went out and got someone not named Golden Tate.
Yeah, I think the receiver situation has sort of settled a little bit in the trade market with those deals, and maybe those, like you said, the teams that really wanted to address that position already have, and the likelihood of someone giving the Giants a high pick for Golden Tate is less now, obviously, because those guys have now been moved. So I don't see it with Golden Tate. But you never know.
Yep, no doubt about it. All right, real quick, looking into the game on Sunday, what's your feel on this one? Because when I look at it, I see two defenses that have struggled to get off the field, one defense that hasn't really generated much of a pass rush, and another one that has been exceeding expectations. And surprisingly enough, and you wrote about this on Thursday, the Giants are the one that seems to be exceeding expectations. So if you can get to Matthew Stafford, if Marcus Golden can continue to play at a high level, and you get a little bit more out of O'Shane Zimenez or somebody along your defensive line, maybe you can dictate a little bit. But my quick flyover, Goodyear blimp drone overlook of this game is it could be a shootout, and I think it comes down to who has the ball last, that type of a game.
I think this is an opportunity for Daniel Jones to really handle another tough road environment. Obviously, the Tampa situation was it's not really a tough place to play for a start, though.
That was MetLife South. It was Giants fans pouring in. I roamed the parking lot before, and there were thousands of Giants fans tailgating. Some of them even booked their flight Thursday before the game, as soon as they found out that Daniel Jones was there, or the retired Long Islanders who happened to be down there.
No doubt. And, of course, playing at the Patriots, that was a tough setting for him. But this is going to be a loud environment. The Lions are better than they were last year, and I think this is going to be a tough task for him. But a shootout with Matthew Stafford. Now, if you say Jones versus Stafford, if you put it like that, who do you like? But I think you have to talk about the talent around each guy, and you have to talk about the vulnerabilities of the opposing defense. So I think there's some opportunities here for Daniel Jones if his line can protect him against what, as you put it, is a pretty underwhelming front, a pretty underwhelming pass rush.
You talk to people around the Lions, and they are very underwhelmed by Damon Harrison this year. Came into camp, skipped all the offseason workouts, came in out of shape, just now trying to fight his way back into shape. Not really graded well by Pro Football Focus. I think he's somewhere around like the 67th rated interior lineman. So they're not happy with Snacks. The front's not getting pressure. They just traded, Quadre Diggs, their secondary, their starting safety. Not a popular move in the locker room. So they Giants might be catching the Lions at the right time here.
Yeah, and I think you look at this Giants pass rush, and you kind of alluded to it. They have been, I wrote about this today, the Giants obviously have been, and folks know this, I'm telling people nothing they don't already know here, the Giants have had an atrocious pass rush. I mean, 2014 is the last time they've had a decent pass rush, so now 15, 16, 17, 18, 4 straight years of just an absolutely atrocious pass rush. But this year they're 8th in the league right now in sack percentage. Pro Football Focus still has them rated pretty low in terms of their pass rush grade, but they've been able to get to the quarterback a little bit more in terms of the sack percentage. 8th in the league right now. Marcus Golden's got 5 sacks. Granted, Lorenzo Carter has not really taken that next step, just 1.5 sacks so far for him. But I think here, if the Giants can continue to make the progress they have as a pass rushing team, that would certainly bode well for them in this game. But it's a toss-up game.
And no Kerryon Johnson in the backfield for the Lions. So I think the Giants are catching them at the right time here. I initially picked the Lions. I might be sending you an email. I might be changing my selection in this game based on all the turmoil in Detroit.
Well, the picks thing is going to be done in an hour, so it's going to be set in stone. There's no going back now.
I got to get it in.
Once I put the words on the page, that's it.
Well, I got to get it in before those words get typed then. So expect an email from me in about 25 minutes changing my pick. I'm going to go in a different direction than I originally thought here, Darryl. I'm going to go with the Giants going into Detroit. They're 6.5-point underdogs. They opened as 7-point dogs. I know that's not that big of a move, but it's a move nonetheless. I think the Giants go in. They dictate offensively. Defensively, they do just enough, and I think they win the game something in the area of 23-17.
I think the score will be right around there. I think that's a fair score. This is a situation where it's just so hard to know what you're going to get out of a rookie quarterback, isn't it? I think we've seen that time and again here in the NFL in recent years, that you get these ebbs and flows, and you could Sam Darnold did last year, and you think like, oh, there's no way this guy's going to come back off a foot injury and be good in the final stretch, and he was great down the stretch last year. Same thing, Sam Darnold looks fantastic against the Cowboys and could not look any. This is his second year. That was his 16th start last week against the Patriots, and he was a nightmare and saw ghosts and all that good stuff. And but I think this is a situation where, yes, the Lions defense could be a little bit vulnerable, but I think I'm going with Lions 24, Giants 20. The Giants still not able to get enough from their rookie quarterback and from an offense that is underwhelming. Even with Saquon Barkley back, he is obviously not the cure-all for this team because they have a lot of other issues. But I think that 23-17, 24-20 range score is about right. I'm going with Lions 24, Giants 20. So no cover for the Lions, but a victory nonetheless. Then again, toss-up game, so don't take this to the bank or anything.
You can file all your complaints there to @Darryl Slater on Twitter for picking against the Giants in his debut appearance on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks.
We need to do like a live episode of this somewhere. We got to do the Lee Corso head because I could just see you pulling the lion head with the big mane over your head in front of a crowded bar of angry Giants fans.
Let's do it.
I kind of want to see that. So we'll try to make that happen. We'll talk to the powers that be, see if we can get you out with the people. But welcome to the pod, Darryl, and it was a fun time.
For sure, yeah. Looking forward to covering the team with you the rest of the season, and won't be in Detroit. So my wife is due coming up.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah, you knew that already. You're
I
kind
did
of pretending
know that.
like you didn't know that.
Congratulating for everybody out there in the listener world.
But yeah, so
they can't congratulate you right now, so I am.
So I won't be in Detroit, but I'll be writing a little bit from home off the game, and then we'll see what happens from there in terms of when I'll be around. But yeah, so enjoy working with you as always, of course, and thanks for letting me be a part of this podcast and pick up the slack from when Ryan leaving and all that good stuff. So yeah, we'll get back. It's about time to get back
in the locker room and talk to some coaches and coordinators. And again, if you love what you hear, we'd love if you would subscribe in the Apple Podcast Store. It's Talk is Cheap. Follow the show @TalkIsCheapNYG. He's @Darryl Slater. I'm @Matt Lombardo NFL. We're getting ready to go back into the locker room and talk to some players. I hope you enjoy the game this week, and we'll talk to you next week right here on NJ.com.